suppose is the way to put it, since the 1960s and the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Campaign, but also an elected representative, both at Stormont level, but also at Derry City Council as well, until recently. And thanks, Emma. And also involved in all sorts of other campaigns, such as the Into the West campaign for rail connection to the Northwest as well. So, Eamonn, it's lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Were you surprised how much people smoked and drank on TV in those days?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things, just to see it, me dragging away at a cigarette. I was smoking 60 cigarettes a day for a long, long time. I don't anymore, haven't done for a few years. Mm-hmm. But I was reminded of that and how strange it looks now. It looks really weird, but even stranger, if I might say so, was the fact there were 9 people around that table, and there, 7 men and 2 women. I don't think you get, at least I hope, you wouldn't get that today, and I think that both the women were treated abominably. The Dr. Turner, we got the name
Dolores Tucker.
Dolores,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that she was talked over, and at one point, my old friend Henry Kelly put his hand on her shoulder. Yeah, no, it's just the general attitude and the comportment of people. You know, I found that the single most shocking thing. It was nothing to do with Catholics and Protestants and all that. It was just astonishing that 50% of the people are women, and they got 2 out of 9 proportion. That tells you something about the society, you know. And I hope that an awful lot of people, I winced when I saw it, and I hope a lot of others did as well. You know, whether we've eliminated all that or to what extent we have is a different subject.
Or moved on. What are your memories of doing it? Do you remember it clearly? Or?
I remember some of it clearly, you know, but to be honest, I mean, it's I remember that was in 1998, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I've reached the age, you know, where sometimes you forget a year, you know, so if that's 65 or 66, I don't know. I now miss decades. So I'm not sure what there's a number of things I remember about the young woman Noni, who was there. I mean, who hardly said a word, you know, sort of in very small way. She actually, I remember before the recording started, she was a very lively and animated person, and she was a wee bit cynical, more than a wee bit cynical, about everything. Right? And she was obviously intimidated by the camera. She wasn't like that, you know. She was, and one of the people are not like that now. People are not as intimidated by the media and by cameras are they. I remember that sort of when I look at it, when my mind goes back to it. That's we were we weren't the nicest people in the world, were we? I mean, when you look at all that, it really is. However.
Well, I suppose it was the level of discourse. I mean, I was going to say to you that what's interesting about that. This is in May 1988, so it's just after Gibraltar, it's just after the Corporals, it's just after Milltown Cemetery, all those kind of things. So there was a sense here, I think, with things were going over a tipping point in terms of the situation. And did that maybe raise the kind of level of discourse? Was that how people talked to each other during the Troubles? I think is.
I think that what we saw, you mean compared to what we saw on the screen?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what you saw on the screen was a wee bit more considered, like I suppose, sort of about some of the discussions there were, which would have been, you know, where people butted heads with one another rather than discuss things in a clear way. You know, but it must strike anybody looking at that and listening to the arguments. You must say something. It's the same old stuff after all these years, and I find it very strange. I'm looking back on the discussion of the 60s, which took place in 1988. We are now looking back on the 1988 discussion of what happened in 1968, and it begins to elide, sort of, I get it all shimmering in front of me without be sure what. But the main conclusion I withdraw from the whole thing is that we haven't made a lot of progress, you know, sort of, and I'm not blaming other people for that. I mean, I was as much obviously as part of that as anybody else. So I mainly feel depressed by having looked at it, you know. I think it's well made and it's engrossing. I find, I mean, particularly somebody of my age and so on, but it is infinitely depressing that exactly the same arguments, more or
Sort of
less,
circular
are
kind
going
of.
on. Yeah.
At one point, you talk about the sort of circular kind of round and round kind of argument about.
Yeah.
I was just going to go back to the sort of the May days or that sort of thing. How did they put any restrictions on what you could talk about? I'm conscious of Death on the Rock had only been
Just before,
people
wasn't it?
bringing me.
Yeah, no, I can't remember anybody trying to put the program was very rambling and open-ended. I mean, it was much longer than it's been. It was more than
Yes,
twice.
3 hours at last.
3 hours of it, if anybody really anxious, you can wait and see the other 2 hours later. If you've nothing better to do with yourself. Now, strangely enough, I can remember doing it. There was almost no preparation. I mean, having a couple of words. And that young woman, Noreen, was the only person I can remember having a word with and said hello again. How you doing, Henry? Henry Kelly. But no, nobody said, here's what you do, or here's the topics for discussion at all, or how long it was going to last, which that was the nature of After Dark.
Yeah.
Some of them lasted more than 3 hours.
Yeah.
That one lasted about 2 hours 20 or something.
I think that was the full run time, but yes, some of the most famous ones, like the Oliver Reed one, and all those ones lasted well into the night.
Yeah. So it's
So it was meant to be a free-ranging discussion, and they let you get on with it then.
Yeah.
And the role of Ian Kennedy as the sort of interlocutor, I suppose. Did you met him before, or?
No, I didn't know. I knew who he was, and maybe well have met him, but I didn't know him very well at all.
Right.
No.
And what did you think of the lineup? I suppose because from our eyes, obviously, I was mentioning to the crowd, Henry Kelly was a game show host. He was going for gold, and yet here he was.
No, I knew. I mean, at that time, I knew Henry very well. Sort of. We were never but we were friends, and if we met again, still would be. But Henry was always, a serious-minded person. Henry took the job as people have probably forgotten the program. Sort of. What was it called again?
Going for gold.
Henry took that job. He told me this himself. He went to London as an editor of the Irish Times, serious career in journalism. In fact, he was at the top of his game. He wasn't making much progress in London. He took the job as a game show host simply to make himself better known. He told me that himself. I wanted to be well known. I thought that would help. So fair play to him. He went and did it. He subsequently played Widow Twankey in the pantomime, I think, at the Police Theatre for 3 or 4 years, and really enjoyed it. That the hell we all of you are sneering at me. I'm being very well paid.
Yes,
there's not much work involved, and we can do it. So I've no idea sort of what the trajectory of Henry's career was after.
It's very interesting. I mean, I think Going for Gold happened, but it's very interesting for us to look back and realise that he was actually, on the spot in '68 and '69. And he certainly had an analysis. I mean, I thought that you and his conversation we just saw it there about class and the South. And the sort of the perceptions of the South was very interesting because there was a bit of tension there in terms of
yes. Henry, a very nice person, and I was looking at it. I mean, if somebody were to come up me and say, McCann, you were a bit arrogant there in that program, I would find it difficult to defend myself. If I can put it as gently as that. I think there was a lot of I was very arrogant and talked over people, and I think that Dr. Turner, wasn't it, the black lady from was treated abominably badly, as well as the young woman and all that there. And I was one of those who did that because I talked over people. And so I wouldn't be allowed to do that now. I think, but anyway, I wouldn't do it. And I think that damaged the conversation. I think it quietened a few people, and it wasn't bad.
Didn't let quieter voices come through.
Exactly.
I mean, I suppose that was that driven maybe because you wanted to get your point across because it was important. These are English audiences, they're
I'm not sure what it was. I don't know. I suppose I was impatient, sort of, and also I have to confess, I did have a certain arrogance in that I absolutely believed that I and people like me better understood the North, sort of, than 99% of other people, and that's a very arrogant thing. I think it depends. Your trust depends on where you're coming from and the perspective that's been created for you. So I shouldn't be flagellating myself either, you know. But I was embarrassed a couple of nights watching it, just, my God, what was I thinking?
Well, it's difficult as well. I mean, you're in there, everyone's plied with drink, and you know, and it's late at night, so you know, obviously,
It's good. You don't get many programs now where you can drink.
No.
That's something you're a wee bit. You know, you can feel it at the end of the program. I feel, and also you can smoke as much as you like. Gosh, that's a different world. You know, it's and
the last person I saw smoking on TV was Peter Cook. Peter Cook would appear and always have a huge ashtray next to him, and then would smoke all the way through his performances. But I think he was the last one left, really. I haven't seen it for a long time. The role of Roy Bradford's quite interesting. He was, I mean, I suppose he was a minor character in terms of the unionist government. I think he was a junior minister.
No, I think he was a full minister.
Was he full?
He was indeed. I would need to check, but as far as I can recall, he was. And he was a very respected man within unionism because he could present, you know, sort of, he wasn't shouting and barking. No, he was, you know, he was an urbane sort of. And it was more, I got to him a wee bit, you know, personally. He was a more interesting man, and I think a rather pleasanter man than he appeared sort of in the programme.
Yeah, he seemed quite bluff and sort of maybe a bit slightly militaristic kind of patrician is the word I'm looking for. But he also, I mean, he became a novelist later on, and he, you know, there was something about him. His take about gradualism and your take about reform and the need for reform, you know, looking back from 1988 as it was, do you think English audiences were attuned to that? Do you think that they picked up on those nuances of
not at all? No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. And to this day, I think it's you know, I think there's a divide. There is a sea border as far as political perception is involved. And what's more, I mean, I spent altogether between the 60s and the 70s 7 years living in London, and I never had any problem with anybody. I really, really liked all the Londoners, and I worked really good. I thought they were terrific people, but they knew nothing about the North. I remember going to work one morning. We used to drive to work in a transit van. There was 13 of us in this section of Greater London Council, and Roddy Firth was sitting right in front of me, and we'd been talking to him. And Roddy turned and he says, "Tell me one thing." He says, "Which part of Ireland do we own?" That sounds offensive. He actually meant that as a genuine question. He was interested. He wanted to learn. He wanted to be told. And that's how he thought, which part of Ireland do we own? So I lied. You know, of course.
Cork.
I told you it's south of Ireland generally. The North's very Irish Republic. But as I say, that wasn't said with any sense of threat or anything like that. And I think an awful lot of English people, that I had met down there, wish Ireland well, wish sort of everybody in the North well, but they don't want to be burdened with having to understand it.
Yeah, the minutiae.
But why should they? Why should they? You know, if you're a working class person from Basildon, sort of, or Cleethorpes or somebody, why should you sort of know what do we know about them?
Or Wales. What do we know about Welsh?
Yeah, so it's a lot of people think there's enough. I never. The thing about the English being anti-Irish, historically, of course, there's a lot of strength in that narrative. But at a personal level, as I looked around me, and I got very, very little of it. Very little of it. I mean, I think there was an induced and a paranoia sort of about the English and so on, and about loads of other things that heightened consciousness dividing us. No need for it.
Was it also about how the media represented here as well? The stories that the media were interested in were the good versus bad, the kind of black and white kind of stories. When you had a chance to talk about, you know, kind of your truth about it and you know, your analysis of what was going on here, did you ever become tired and say, I can't be bothered anymore? Trying to persuade and trying to get people across, you know?
No, I'm still not tired of it, you know, sort of. I've got a few decades left of me yet, you know, sort of. I am acutely aware of how similar the conversation is and recurs, and that's, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I mean, it's the set of circumstances that history has bequeathed to us, you know, but we sort of can't get out of it. The way it's happened, it's of course, you would know sort of my solution to that sort of is to concentrate on the politics of class and not of community. But I mean, I would freely confess sort of that that's not sort of the common sense of the situation now. So it's, but we're getting there, and we will get there, and it'll all change. Well, the future, I do believe that the future is bright. I do believe, and particularly sort of when you look at what has been the agencies for change, sort of, and more recent times, it's been women, it's particularly been young women. I think the campaign on the amendment a couple of years back, sort of in the south, I remember looking around me at times where we canvassing teams in Carndona and Donegal somewhere, and realising that it consisted almost entirely of young women under the age of 24. I mean, full of enthusiasm, not of